Good afternoon. Those of you that are in the know, or perhaps those of you who follow Facebook as regularly as I do, may have already heard today that the glorious Mr. Richard Branson, that red, white and blue patriot, that guy that we know is going to save the NHS as we know it, that man who's got a billionaires island, who's going to be so good to the British people, and has already Sir Richard Branson, well, don't know if you read it, but perhaps you should have done. He was urging workers for Virgin to lie about health and safety issues when Virgin had a health and safety inspection. Let's hope Richard doesn't ask pilots to lie about some items that are defective on their checklist as they get ready to fly you off to Florida or something. Or maybe you might not get there, or maybe you might not come back. Surely it's a lie. Surely, good, honest to goodness, Mr. Richard Branson wouldn't ask people to lie about matters of life and death. Matters of, what do the Tories call it again? Health and safety red tape. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Health and safety red tape, yep. All red tape, as I used to say when I was an HSE representative at Hotpoint. Better red tape than bloody bandages. Now, you might think that those issues sort of all just occurred years ago. You know, things are much safer at work now. They're not like they were in the Edwardian era. Yep, I'm back to it again, but it's still brilliant. I want you to just listen with me for a second while I read this extract about a health and safety at work issue. A health and safety at work issue that affected these painters. A name that you'll particularly need to listen out for is Philpot. Poor old Philpot. He's a very old working man now. Probably a bit old like me. And the old fingers, like as a decorator, your fingers go a bit rheumatic. So the old rheumatoid arthritis in Edwardian times is affecting Philpot's ability to work. I'm naturally sure that if Philpot were real, and if he were alive today, and if he went for a work capability assessment, he would be able, and I quote, to put a pen in his top pocket and would be told, "Find work as a decorator, you scrounging poor person. Get a job, or we don't give you any money. Stop scrounging." But unfortunately, Philpot has been detailed today to paint a large gable end on a house that is between two houses. There's a small alleyway, or I believe in some places they call them even a ginnel. There's a small ginnel running up between the two buildings, and raising the ladder, which is really not a painter's ladder, it's a house builder's ladder. It's got huge metal rungs. It's over 65 feet tall, so hence the chapter is called the 65. 65 rungs set about a foot apart with a metal bracing on it. You know, bit like sort of putting up scaffolding, but then again, in Tory Britain, oh, it's going to take time, isn't it? Can't we just tie the ladder down? That'll be quicker. And sure enough, as the men are struggling up the hill on a cart, with this ladder on a cart, they are passed by Rushton and Grinder, their bosses, and they are all, in fact, well, I think it's Rushton says to Grinder, who's in, horse and cart with him. I think he says something like, no, it's the other way around. Grinder says to Rushton, but, I mean, surely you need a horse to do that kind of work. And Rushton looks back at Grinder and says, no, the donkeys we have are perfectly fine. Donkeys! That's how they saw their workers. I wonder how Richard Branson sees you if you happen to work for his company. Ever wonder how your corporate masters see you? Do you think they might refer to you as a donkey? Listen to this, though. This is how the accident happens, okay? There's been an argument previously with Nimrod the mighty hunter, who's basically the coddy, the foreman, because they hadn't started work early enough, because they'd actually had the temerity to go and collect the ladder in working time. Oh, no, 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 no. He expected them there with the tools at 6 o'clock. He expected that half an hour spent shoving that ladder up that hill and then down on the other side to be paid for by them. Why should the company pay for getting that ladder there? Terrible, terrible. So they don't now want to have any further problems. It turns out, though, that the lad, Bert, goes back to the shop because they'd forgotten a rope with which to pull the ladder. Now, this rope that Bert brings back is, well, to say the least, frayed, to say the least, unsafe, to say the least, it wouldn't pass inspection to hold a load like that. But the workers are in a hurry. They don't want a telling off from Nimrod. The job wasn't started, according to Nimrod, on time. Things must be done. Sacrifices must be made. Imagine without health and safety at work regulations, though. Just what the Tories want. Just what they want. Yep. Here's the story, anyway. For Christ's sake, don't say nothing about it now, replied Sawkins. There'll be enough talk and waste of time. There's been enough talk and waste of time over this job already. Ned made no answer, and by this time, having reached the ground, Bundy made it fast to the ladder about 6 rungs from the top. That's the rope I was talking about. The ladder was lying on the ground, parallel to the side of the house. The task of raising it would have been much easier if they'd been able to lay it at right angles to the house wall. But that was impossible because of the premises next door and the garden wall between the two houses. On account of its having to be raised up in this manner, the men at the top would not be able to get a straight pull on the rope. They would have to stand back in another room without being able to see the ladder, and the rope would have to be drawn around the corner of the window, rasping against the edge of the stone sill and the brickwork. The end of the rope having been made fast to the top of the ladder, Crass and Harlow stood on the floor, and the other three raised. Crass and Harlow stood on the floor, and the other three raised the top from the ground. As Barrington was the tallest, he took the middle position underneath the ladder. Getting underneath the ladder, grasping the rungs on his left, and Bundy on his right, each holding one side of the ladder. At a signal from Crass, Dawson and Sawkins began to haul on the rope, and the top of the ladder began to rise slowly into the air. Philpot was not much use at this work, which made it all the harder for the other two, who were lifting, besides putting an extra strain on the rope. His lack of strength, and the efforts of Barrington and Bundy to make up for him, caused the ladder to sway from side to side, as it would not have done if they'd all been equally capable. Meanwhile, downstairs, Dawson and Sawkins, although the ladder was yet only a little more than halfway up, noticed that as they hauled and strained on the rope, that it had worn a groove for itself in the corner of the brickwork at the side of the window, and every now and again, although they pulled with all their strength, they were not able to draw any part of the rope at all, and it seemed to them as if the others down below must have let go of their hold altogether or ceased lifting. That actually was what happened. The three men found the weight so overpowering that once or twice they were compelled to relax their efforts for a few seconds, and at those times the rope had to carry the whole weight of the ladder, and the part of the rope that had to bear the greatest part chanced to be at the angle of the brickwork at the side of the window, and presently it happened that one of the frayed and worn places that Dawson had remarked on was just at the angle of the sill during a momentary pause. On one end there hung the ponderous ladder, straining the frayed rope against the corner of the brickwork and the sharp edge of the stone sill. At the other end were Dawson and Sawkins pulling at it with all their strength, and in that instant the rope snapped like a piece of thread. One end remained in the hands of Sawkins and Dawson, who reeled backwards into the room. The other end flew up into the air, writhing like a lash of a giant whip. For a moment the heavy ladder swayed from side to side. Barrington, standing underneath, with his hands raised above his head, grasping one of the rungs, struggling desperately to hold it up. On his right stood Bundy, also with his arms upraised, holding the sides, and on the left, between the ladder and the wall, was Philpot. For a brief space of time they strove fiercely to support the overpowering weight, but Philpot had no strength, and the ladder, swaying from right to left, crashed down, crushing him upon the ground and against the wall of the house. He fell face downwards, with the ladder across his shoulders. The side that had the cast iron bands twisted round it fell across the back of his neck, forcing his face into the bricks at the base of the wall. He uttered no cry, and was quite still, with blood streaming from cuts on his face and trickling from his ears. Barrington was also hurled to the ground, with his head and arms under the ladder. His head and face were cut and bleeding, and he was unconscious. None of the others were hurt, for they had time to jump clear when the ladder fell. Their shouts soon brought all the other men running to the spot, and the ladder was quickly lifted off the two motionless figures. At first it seemed that Philpot was dead, but Easton rushed for a neighbourhood doctor, who came in a few minutes. He knelt down and carefully examined the crushed and motionless form of Philpot, while the other men stood by in terrified silence. Barrington, who was but momentarily stunned, was sitting against the wall and had suffered nothing more than serious cuts and minor bruises. The doctor's examination of Philpot was a very brief one, and when he rose from his knees, even before he spoke, they knew from his manner their worst fears were realised. Philpot was dead. Think about it. After we've gone from the EU, what about health and safety red tape then? What about health and safety? There won't be any. Rely on this. People are going to continue to die under the Tories, and many of them will die in accidents at work, because profit, like the employers of these men, is more important than human life. Take care. Remember, only in socialism, only in Labour is there hope.